A cistern is a room that holds water. Remove the water and you have a room. This is not a metaphor. It is a fact of construction that every stonemason on the American frontier understood, and that most farmers forgot the moment the cistern stopped holding water, which happened often enough that the countryside was littered with them. Dry stone chambers sunk into hillsides and buried under barn floors and hidden beneath kitchen gardens. Their walls still sound, their mortar still tight. Their only deficiency, the one thing that had defined their purpose, which was the water they no longer contained. The cistern on the Kell property in Barron County, Kentucky, was built in 1841 by a mason named Seward, who charged $14 for the work and who built it the way he built everything, too well. The chamber was 10 feet in diameter and 9 feet deep, circular, with walls of cut limestone blocks laid in lime mortar 2 feet thick. The floor was flagstone, flat slabs of the same limestone, fitted tight and sealed with mortar until the surface was as smooth and waterproof as a dinner plate. The ceiling was a corbelled dome, each course of stone projecting slightly inward from the one below until the courses met at the top in a capstone that closed the dome like a cork in a bottle. The dome was 2 feet thick at the base and 18 inches at the crown, and it supported the weight of 4 feet of earth above it, without timber, without iron, without anything except the geometry of the arch, which is the oldest structural principle in the world and the most reliable. The cistern held water for 32 years. In 1873, the limestone bed that fed the spring cracked during a drought, and the water table shifted 6 feet east, and the cistern went dry. The Kell family, who had used the cistern as their primary water source for 3 decades, dug a new well, abandoned the cistern, and forgot about it the way people forget about anything that stops being useful, completely, within a season. Nell Kell did not forget, because Nell Kell had nowhere else to go. She was 20 years old and had been married to Eustace Kell, the grandson of the man who built the farm, for 11 months when Eustace's parents, Horace and Betty Kell, told her to leave. The reason was simple and old. Nell had not produced a child, and Bet, who had produced 6 and who regarded fertility as a moral achievement rather than a biological event, had decided that the fault was Nell's and that the solution was a new wife. Eustace, who loved Nell but feared his mother more, said nothing when Betty told Nell to pack her things, and his silence was the last sound Nell heard from him. Not a word, not a protest, not even the throat clearing of a man who knows he should speak and cannot. She left on the morning of the 15th of March, 1885, carrying a canvas bag with her clothes, a wool blanket, a cast-iron pot, a sewing basket, and the family Bible that had been her mother's, and that Betty had tried to keep because Betty kept everything. Nell took it anyway. It was the only argument she won. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, slight but wiry, with straw-colored hair that she wore in 2 braids pinned across the top of her head like a crown, pale blue eyes that went wide when she was surprised and narrow when she was thinking, a small, straight nose, a mouth that curved naturally upward at the corners so that she looked like she was about to smile even when she was not, and hands that were quick and clever, the hands of a quilter, which she was, and a gardener, which she had been since she could walk. She did not leave the Kell property. She walked to the back of the farm, past the barn, past the hog pen, past the old orchard where the apple trees had gone wild, and she climbed the hill behind the orchard to the place where the abandoned cistern sat beneath its 4 feet of earth. marked only by a slight depression in the ground and the stone access shaft that rose 2 feet above the surface, capped with a flat limestone slab that had not been moved in 12 years. She moved the slab. She looked down into the shaft, a circular opening 3 feet across, and saw the cistern floor 9 feet below, dry, clean, lit by the gray morning light that fell through the shaft like a column of pale silver. She climbed down. The cistern floor was dry and clean. 43 years of disuse had not damaged it because there was nothing to damage. Stone does not rot. Stone does not rust. Stone does not decay or warp or sag or attract insects or dissolve in humidity. The flagstone floor was as level and solid as the day Seward laid it, and the walls rose around it in a perfect circle of fitted limestone that smelled faintly of minerals and old water and the deep earth. The smell of a room that has been closed for a decade and that still remembers what it was built to hold. The temperature was the first surprise. At the surface, the March morning was 36 degrees, with a raw wind from the northwest that cut through Nell's wool shawl and found the gaps in her cotton dress. 9 feet below, inside the cistern, it was 52 degrees, 16 degrees warmer, with no fire, no heat source, no explanation other than the earth itself, which maintains a constant temperature at depth, regardless of what the surface air is doing. 50 to 55 degrees in Kentucky, year-round, summer and winter, a temperature that is too cool for comfort, but too warm for freezing, and that can be raised to comfort with a remarkably small amount of additional heat. The second surprise was the silence. 2 feet of stone wall and 4 feet of earth above absorbed every sound from the surface. The wind, the birds, the distant lowing of the Kell cattle, the creak of the barn door, the voice of Bet Kell giving orders to someone in the farmyard below. All of it gone. The cistern was as quiet as the inside of a closed hand, and the quiet was not emptiness, but presence, the presence of stone around you on all sides, holding you the way water holds a fish, completely, without effort, without end. Nell set her canvas bag on the flagstone floor and sat beside it and looked up at the Corbel dome above her. The diminishing circles of limestone rising to the capstone, the geometry perfect, the mortar tight, the whole structure as sound as the day Seward set the keystone and collected his $14. And she decided to stay. If you want to know what a girl who was kicked out by her in-laws built inside an abandoned cistern that made the whole county stop and stare, subscribe to The Warm Floor and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. The access shaft was the first problem and the first solution. 3 feet in diameter was too narrow for comfortable entry, but perfect for ventilation. Fresh air fell down the shaft by gravity, displacing the stale air that rose through the warm column, creating a natural draft that kept the underground chamber fresh without any mechanical assistance. Nell built a ladder from cedar poles lashed with rope, 8 rungs, 9 feet, and leaned it against the shaft wall, and the ladder became her front door for the first month until she built a better one. The better entrance was a horizontal tunnel. Nell dug into the hillside from the downhill face, the south side of the cistern where the earth cover was shallowest, excavating a passage 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall that connected the hillside surface to the cistern wall at floor level. She broke through the 2-foot limestone wall at the base using a sledgehammer borrowed from Otho Grimes, a neighboring farmer who asked no questions because Otho was 71 years old and had stopped asking questions about other people's business sometime around his 50th birthday. The tunnel gave her a walk-in entrance, a passage she could enter standing slightly bent, carrying supplies, without climbing a ladder through a 3-foot hole. She built a door at the tunnel's outer face, a frame of cedar planks covered with a double layer of deerskin hung on leather hinges, fitting tight against the stone-lined tunnel walls. The door faced south, catching the winter sun, and when it was open, the tunnel acted as a light shaft, sunlight entering the horizontal passage and illuminating the cistern interior with a warm golden glow that reached the opposite wall and made the circular stone room feel less like a hole in the ground and more like what it was becoming, which was a home. The cistern floor was already finished. The flagstone surface that Seward the mason had laid in 1841 was as smooth and level as the day he set it, the mortar joints tight, the stone dry. Nell swept it clean, scrubbed it with creek water and sand, and laid woven rush mats across the center. The floor was cool, 52 degrees year-round, the constant temperature of the earth at this depth, and the rush mats provided insulation between the cold stone and her feet, while allowing the thermal mass of the floor to moderate the room's temperature in both summer and winter. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to share it and subscribe to The Warm Floor, because stories like these deserve to be remembered. The walls needed nothing. 2 feet of cut limestone in lime mortar, laid by a man who charged $14 and earned every cent. The walls were plumb, solid, waterproof, and capable of holding temperature the way they had once held water. Absolutely. The interior surface was smooth enough to hang things from. Nell drove iron spikes into the mortar joints and hung her clothes, her sewing basket, a lantern, bundles of dried herbs, and a small mirror that she had salvaged from the farmhouse trash pile and that Beto had thrown away because the glass was cracked, which Nell did not consider a flaw, because a cracked mirror shows the same face as a whole one. The dome ceiling was the room's finest feature. The corbelled stone rose in diminishing circles above the living space, each course projecting slightly inward, the joints tight, the curves smooth, the whole structure converging on the capstone 9 feet above the floor. Nell left the capstone in place. It was the cistern's structural keystone, and removing it would have weakened the dome. But she cleared the access shaft above it and covered the shaft opening with a hinged wooden lid that could be propped open in warm weather for additional ventilation and light. She built her hearth against the north wall, a small stone platform with a fire back of flat limestone and a smoke channel that she constructed with painstaking care, running it up the interior wall and into the horizontal tunnel, where the draft from the south-facing door opening drew the smoke outward and away from the living space. The draft was strong and clean. The temperature difference between the warm cistern interior and the cool tunnel created a natural pull that cleared the smoke in seconds, and the stone walls absorbed the fire's heat and radiated it back into the circular room for hours. The sleeping platform was against the east wall. Cedar poles and rope raised 8 inches off the flagstone floor, with the wool blanket and a mattress of dried grass covered in a quilt that Nell sewed from fabric scraps she collected from the mending work she began doing for neighbors within a month of moving underground. The quilting was her trade, her talent, and her primary source of income. She produced quilts of a quality and intricacy that the women of Barron County recognized as exceptional, and orders began arriving within weeks. She set up a quilting frame near the tunnel entrance where the light was best. The south-facing tunnel admitted a column of warm golden light for 6 hours a day in winter and 8 in summer, and the light fell directly on the frame, illuminating her work with a steady natural glow that did not flicker like candlelight and did not shift like window light. She could sew for hours without eye strain, which mattered because the quilts she made were not simple pieced blankets, but intricate applique work. Flowers and vines and geometric patterns stitched in thread so fine and even that the women who bought them held them up to the light and marveled at the precision, which was the precision of a woman who had nothing to do with her evenings except sew, and nothing to distract her except the sound of fire on stone and the deep underground quiet that makes concentration not a discipline, but a gift. The quilting paid. By May she had earned enough to buy provisions: cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, coffee. And by July she had enough saved for the goat, a young Nubian doe that she led down the tunnel and penned in a stone enclosure she built against the cistern's west wall, using the cistern wall as one side and dry stack limestone for the other three. The goat adapted to the underground life within days. The constant temperature and the absence of wind and rain and flies suited the animal's constitution, and the doe produced milk with a consistency that surprised Nell, because the stable temperature meant stable metabolism, meant stable production, and the goat gave 1.5 quarts daily through the summer, and did not drop below 1 quart even in the coldest weeks of winter. She built a small table from salvaged lumber, planks pulled from a collapsed fence on the back of the Kell property, carried up the hill one at a time, and assembled in the cistern with pegs and a borrowed auger, a cedar stool, a shelf above the hearth for her tin cup and her cast-iron pot, and the Bible that Betty had tried to keep. A second shelf on the south wall for her provisions. The jars of preserves she put up from wild blackberries and pawpaws, the dried herbs she gathered from the hillside, the hard cheese she learned to make from the goat's milk by trial and error, and by asking Otho Grimes's wife Dorcas, who had been making cheese since before Nell was born, and who shared the knowledge freely, because Dorcas was the kind of woman who believed that knowledge was like bread. It went stale if you didn't pass it around. The winter of 1885 to 86 was the test. December brought cold, single digits on the surface, the ground freezing to 8 inches, the wind cutting across the hilltop above the cistern with the particular malice of a Kentucky winter that has decided to be memorable. Inside the cistern, the temperature held at 54 degrees. 54 degrees in a room where the fire burned 5 pounds of wood per evening. A fire so small it would not have warmed a dog in a conventional cabin. Because the 2-foot stone walls and the corbel dome and the 4 feet of earth above held the heat the way they had once held water. Absolutely, without leaking, without losing, without any gap or seam through which the precious contents could escape. The Kell farmhouse, 400 yards downhill, burned 35 pounds of wood per day through the same cold and maintained a temperature of 38 degrees on the worst nights. Horace Kell, Eustace's father, spent the winter hauling wood and feeding the fireplace and complaining about the cold that found every gap in the clappered walls, and he did not know, or chose not to know, that the girl his wife had thrown out was living 400 yards uphill in a room that was 16 degrees warmer and burned 1/7 of the fuel. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button right now. It is free, takes a second, and helps the warm floor reach more people who need to hear it. Now, back to the story. The first visitor from the Kell household was not Eustace. It was Bet. She came in April, 1 month after she had told Nell to leave, because the quilting circle at the Baptist church had told her that Nell was living in the old cistern, and Bet did not believe it. She walked up the hill behind the orchard, found the tunnel entrance in the south face of the slope, ducked through the deerskin door, walked the 3-foot passage, and emerged into the cistern. She stood in the circular room and looked at the flagstone floor, and the rush mats, and the corbel dome overhead, and the hearth burning against the north wall, and the sleeping platform and the quilting frame set up near the tunnel entrance, where the light was best, and the finished quilts hanging from the walls. 3 of them, commissioned and paid for, each one more beautiful than anything Bet had ever sewn. And she looked at Nell, who was sitting at the quilting frame with a needle in her hand and a look on her face that was not anger and not triumph, but something worse, which was indifference. "You're living in a hole," Bet said. "I'm living in a room," Nell said. "You're standing in it." Betta looked at the room again. The warm stone walls, the clean floor, the dome overhead, the fire, the quilts, the provision shelf with its jars of preserves and sacks of cornmeal, the lantern light catching the smooth curve of the limestone courses. And she left without saying anything else, because Bet was a woman who knew when a room was better than her argument. And this room, this stone circle beneath the hill she owned, was better than anything she could say against it. The neighbors came after Bet. They came through April and May, and into the summer, ducking through the tunnel and standing in the dome and marveling at the temperature. 62 degrees in June when the surface was 90, 54 degrees in December when the surface was 22, and at the quiet, which was absolute, the 2 feet of stone and 4 feet of earth above, absorbing every sound from the surface world and leaving the cistern interior in a silence that was not empty but full. The way a well is full even when it holds no water, because the shape itself contains something. Thank you for watching this story on the warm floor. If it reminded you that sometimes the best room in the house is the one everyone forgot was there, please share it. Subscribe for more stories from the frontier and tell us in the comments, what would you have built? Otho Grimes, who had lent the sledgehammer and asked no questions, came to see the cistern in June and sat on the cedar stool beside the hearth and drank water from Nell's tin cup and said, "Seward built this in 41. I was a boy. He said it would hold water forever. He didn't say it would hold a woman too, but I expect he'd have been pleased." By the autumn of 1885, Nell had expanded the space, digging a second tunnel from the cistern's east wall into the hillside, creating a cold storage alcove where the temperature held at 48 degrees year-round, cool enough to keep butter and milk fresh without ice, cool enough to store root vegetables through the winter without sprouting, cool enough to age the hard cheese she began making from the milk of a goat she bought with quilting money. The cistern became, by the second winter, not just a home, but a system, a living space connected to a cold pantry, connected to a ventilation shaft, connected to a light tunnel. All of it underground, all of it stone, all of it built by a mason in 1841, who could not have imagined that his $14 cistern would one day shelter a woman whose only crime was not producing a child on a schedule that satisfied her mother-in-law. Nell lived in the cistern for 7 years. She never returned to the Kell farmhouse. She built a quilting reputation that extended beyond Barron County into the surrounding districts, and her underground workshop, cool in summer, warm in winter, silent always, produced work of a quality that the surface world, with its drafts and its dust and its distractions, could not match. Eustace came to the cistern once in the 2nd year. He stood at the tunnel entrance and did not go in, and what he said is not recorded, and what Nell said is not recorded, and perhaps nothing was said at all, because some silences are not empty, but complete. Settle back, Listen carefully and journey with us through the legends, hard truths, and enduring wisdom of the American frontier. Subscribe to The Warm Floor. The fire is warm, the night is still, and the frontier has much to teach.